Welcome into the Bite Meat Podcast. John Lopez right here. I say it every week. We try to get on this podcast, brought to you every week, by the way, by Texas Star Grill Shop, which Rick and Corey and all the guys over there are fantastic friends of mine. We want to get some of America's greatest pitmasters, leaders in the industry, to talk with us and spill the beans, so to speak. A little back how the sausage is made, sometimes literally. With this great industry that we all have a complete passion for. So this week, we have Aaron Franklin. Aaron Franklin, everybody's quite familiar with your work. But, one thing that has always intrigued me about you, and obviously we're familiar with seeing you all over Austin and all over the country doing the things you do on television shows. I'm a barbecue pitmaster freak, by the way. Don't miss any of those episodes. I know you've been on there a few times. We can talk about barbecue. We can be here for hours, and we're not, so you don't have to worry about that. About like techniques and some of that. Now we're going to get into a little bit of that, but it's always intrigued me the science that you use. I mean, that big brain that you have, and sort of transitioning that into our passion, into the barbecue world. And the first time I really kind of started like paying a lot of attention to what you do, Aaron, is when I started using, some people call it peach paper, butcher paper, and everything. And I want to clear that up, first of all. I always credit you for kind of inventing that whole phenomenon. You don't have to be modest. I mean, years ago, what made you do that? Did you kind of just like light bulb moment? Did anybody influence you with that? How did that happen? Because now we all do it, and we'll get into that.
Yeah, well, I definitely didn't invent the use of butcher paper with brisket. A lot of people way before me had used butcher paper, that's for sure. But it really, happened in kind of like the early trailer days, cooking in the backyard. Me and a friend were kind of, fiddling around, cooking stuff. And it's like, and I was holding stuff in butcher paper. And I think the first time it happened, if I remember right, granted, this is like, 20.
Like 08, 09, right?
Ago.
When you really started using it?
What's that?
When 08 or 09 is when I really started seeing, it kind of take off.
I started doing that stuff probably in 2003 or 2004, somewhere in there. But we opened up Franklin Barbecue in 09. So at that point, we'd already been having backyard barbecues for a good while. But if I remember right, like I said, this is, a really long time ago. And my memory, might fail me a bit. But if I remember correctly, I'd done a barbecue in the backyard, had about 100 or so people coming over, and I thought I'd kind of messed up and the briskets were done like a little too early. So I'd wrapped them. I let them sit on the pit for a while. I was like, oh, I don't know.
I'm not familiar with that. I've never done that myself, except
never,
maybe 100
never.
times. Maybe
no one has ever messed up a barbecue cook at all. None of us. But, I'd wrapped them in butcher paper, and I remember opening them up and being like, oh my God, these are great. And they held moisture. And then of course that's a light bulb. And, that's all really any of this stuff is, just little light bulbs going off all the time. But I think from there, we kind of just started, I don't know. It
worked.
Experimenting with it. But, as, with any barbecue place that's cooking a lot of food, you don't want to have a bunch of naked briskets running around. So we got to wrap them in something.
Yeah, just kind of for technical purposes. And don't worry about that. I am an enormous dog fan, and I'm sure everybody is. But you're handling them, you're taking bark off and all that. Now, what about like the mindset of it, the themology, so to speak? Because I've always told people two things. One, I'm pretty embarrassed about, and the other one I think I'm right on.
Oh, go on.
Yeah. The one I'm embarrassed about is, I'm teaching my sons. They're all adults now. They're in their early 30s. About briskets, and they want to learn how I do it because I've been doing it forever. And so I said, be sure to wrap it tight in that paper. Be sure to wrap it tight. And about 5 or 6 years ago, my son said, why does it have to be tight? And I went, I don't know. That's what I've seen. I said, I don't know why it has to be tight. So answer that part first. And then the second part is the moisture with it. I've clearly seen that. It allows moisture to stay in, but it also allows some to get out, correct?
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. And really, if I had my druthers, I would probably cook a brisket without wrapping it at all, because I'd like the textural odyssey, if you will. Like some parts are crunchy, some parts are soft. You get all this different stuff going on, because a brisket's kind of a complicated piece of meat. It's 3 different types of fat and two muscles that don't cook the same. But you've got that on one end of the spectrum, and then you've got the completely opposite end, which is using foil. And I'm not a fan of foil. Sometimes it's a good trick to have up your sleeve if you're kind of in a weird cook, you've got some questionable stuff, things aren't going quite right. It's definitely a good trick to have sometimes. But where we landed with butcher paper was it's kind of in the middle. It does allow the brisket to breathe a little bit. It's not super duper steamy like you would get with the foil, but it's also not just evaporating all this moisture like you would, get if you didn't wrap at all. So it's kind of a happy medium between all the stuff, but it also allows you in a restaurant, you got 100, 120 briskets. You can stack them up on sheet trays. You can leave them in a warmer for a while and they hold real well. But the reason why you want to wrap it tight is because you don't want.
Thank you. I can use this answer.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just not going to retain moisture. It's not really going to work if you've got like a baggy wrap on this thing because you've got airspace in there to kind of overcome, and you're also just kind of creating another layer of insulation, which you don't want.
Yeah. Now this is what really intrigues me about what you do and have been doing at such a high level. So I was at Texas Star Grill Shop the other day. It was that Chris Shepard thing, and I think Chris is a friend of yours. In fact, he told me I told him I was going to get with you this week, and he said he got one of your prototypes on your big pit.
Yeah. He's got one in his backyard for sure.
That's pretty cool, and I was just fascinated by it. So I'm looking at some of the ones that they have there that Rick has, and I'm looking at the smoke stack, and I'm saying, man, that's awfully high. And then Rick told me you actually tinkered with that. Like the actual height several times. Why is that? And what is the reason for the height of that?
Well, so the real reason, those backyard cookers were really designed to be a smaller version of what we use at the restaurant. We use 1,000-gallon tanks at the restaurant. And my preferred size is actually a lot smaller. I think 1,000 gallons is kind of a little too big for my taste. I don't think the air quite works exactly right. They're just kind of, point of diminishing return. On the sizing. But so if you think about a fire, you don't ever want to push a fire. Like you can just kind of guide it, but you always want to pull it. And that's kind of what makes a good barbecue pit is that you're pulling all this air through there, and how you guide that air throughout the cooker. If you think about it as like an AC vent in the car, it just kind of make it go over here, but that's what you're using your wood for. So you can kind of line your wood up one way, you stack it up a certain way, you get a coal bed. That's why we have really long fireboxes, is to have a nice coal bed back there and to give you a little bit of room for the wood to go in and out. But none of it works without a really, really hard airflow, because that's what allows the moisture from the briskets to, exhaust out the cooker. You also have to introduce humidity at the same time, but that's kind of where you find that balance. And, if you think about a cooker, like way on the opposite end of the spectrum, not even the same kind of cooker at all, but like a BG, like a Kamado style, right? There's no stacks, therefore there's no airflow, but it's also refractory stuff, so it holds all this moisture. That's why you can't get good bark, because you can't get that moisture out of there. So, in the grand scheme of things, an offset cooker is actually just the opposite of that. You have a really, really hot fire, because once you get that temperature up, that's where you get the good flavors. Also known as water solubility in the particulate there, but you also get the airflow and you get all these things. So it's pretty much just a more versatile tool, I guess.
Yeah. And I was, this is fascinating to me because I was looking at it and I'm underneath and through it and all the curved lines, which, I think makes the smoke flow a little better. And then I was looking, for lack of a better term, it looked like a baffle on one end by the firebox. And then
we just call it
the smoke collector. So what is that? The back, it just lets the smoke stay evenly over all the grate?
Well, so the air doesn't stay even. There's a lot of chaotic airflow going on inside there, but that deflector plate is one of the things that helps create that. So say you've got a big stack on one end, right?
Yeah.
It's pulling air through, but it's pulling air through the firebox. So you've got this hot air that's going through the firebox over the fire. It's getting heated up and all this stuff. And then it goes under that plate. So there's a certain rate of airflow that's going on under that. It's kind of like an airfoil, like on a plane, right? Things weigh 600 pounds, not going anywhere. And there's definitely not enough airflow to make that happen. But it's kind of the same idea, is that as the air is moving quickly under the deflector plate, we polish that and it's rounded off and there's no sharp edges or any of that stuff. There's hot, stagnant air on top of that, but it's not quite as hot as what's coming from the fire. So it's like a bimetallic strip. It kind of makes the air curl around. So that's kind of what creates that airflow. But it also makes a really good shelf for a water pan.
It does. It does. Okay, so
you could also grill a pork chop on it if you really wanted to.
Well, no, there's a thought right there. That's absolutely a thought. All right, so like for the backyard cooks like myself and others, what in layman's terms, this just makes for a more consistent cook. I mean, if we can just kind of dumb this down, tell us what it really does for what we have on our grill, on our pit.
Well, so I don't know that it makes it for a more consistent cook, but it gives you another tool to put in your toolbox as far as your cooker goes. So you can control, the amount of air if you want to build a slow fire. Like at the restaurant, I tell people like, oh, the fires are too fast, too slow. Build a slower fire. That's kind of what you would do over the course of 12, 13, 14-hour brisket is you want to adjust that airflow, but that's what you do with your fire. So when you have that deflector plate right there, like I said, it gives you a good place to put a water pan because you need a water pan right there. But it also just kind of helps that airflow because if you didn't have it, the air would just go to the top of the cooker and kind of then it would have to make its way out. So it really just kind of that's our little AC vent. We're just kind of guiding the air where we want it to go.
Yeah, and airflow is what it's all about. A lot of people, when they're cooking, on a big offset pit like that, they'll kind of baffle down the door. And I know I think I know this. You like to kind of keep it open so it keeps the airflow going, right? I mean, where the wood is.
But sometimes it gets real cold outside and sometimes windy. So there's that. And my trick has always been just to take some foil and just kind of make a little makeshift gasket right there. If it's really cold outside, because cookers pull harder in the cold weather. So there's that factor also. But yeah, I mean, I think I like to control the rate of my fire by maybe wood selection. For example, you might pick a slightly larger piece and kind of, that's pretty dry, maybe bury it down in the coals to kind of slow down the fire and let it kind of do that. Because at some point, when you first put a brisket on, you want a pretty slow amount of airflow because you don't want to dry out the edges of the flat too much. It's all kind of, damage control. But then later on, when you want to get a brisket off and it's wrapped, you want a lot more airflow because you need to get the collagen to break down. So that happens with convection. And that's actually what allows the briskets, or any meat really, just to cook a lot faster. It's more the convective heat.
Yeah, we're talking briskets mainly here, but obviously there's so many things.
I mean, everybody's talking about brisket.
Everybody's talking about brisket. Everybody's talking about brisket. But by the way, did I hear that you taught yourself how to weld?
Oh, it's not that hard. I read
Come on now.
That came with a welder.
You did what?
I read the booklet that came with the welding machine.
Yeah, YouTube is awesome. YouTube. I can't believe. So that's where the level of passion was. And when did you do this? And when did you start making these big pits?
So
not for the not for the pop-ups or anything.
Yeah, not what I call a big one, like what a normal person would call a big one. Yeah, tomato. So yeah, really the first backyard pit happened when Jordan McKay and I were working on the first book. So that would have been summer of 14, I think, is when we wrote that book. And that was kind of a little bit of a head scratcher. We were at the old shop, and I just used some spare pipes and stuff like that. And I was like, you know what? It would be cool if we made a small one for a normal size yard.
For regular people. For regular people.
And it's still pretty big, I guess,
Oh yeah, it's big. It's a big boy. It certainly got my eye. It's fantastic. Now, when we're in our backyards and we're cooking, we fall into habits, especially here in Texas. Beef, brisket, ribs, chicken. And I tell people this all the time because I'm always experimenting with other things and trying other things. Do you feel like that's kind of changing, or what do you feel like people are missing the boat on? Because I know I sent you an email. I'm talking vegetables right now. Like vegetables on a pit are just a million times better than when you cook them or boil them or whatever. Do you feel like they're I guess what I'm asking, what are we sleeping on in terms of what we could really be doing to fully utilize these pits?
I mean, really, anything you want to eat. I mean, I prefer vegetables and fish, but I think I typically like a hotter cook on stuff like that. So I'll kind of use like a charcoal chimney, or maybe I'll do vegetables like, take a small grate and put it in the firebox and actually cook on the coals
Yeah.
while I'm smoking something else.
I used your PK. I got your PK, and I use
Yeah,
that.
those things are great.
Yeah.
I love a PK, especially the AF300.
That's what I'm saying. The little light blue lid. I like that thing.
Yeah. But I think like I kind of tend to like grilled flavors a little bit more on vegetables, unless you're doing like squash or, something kind of like a root or a tuber or something like that.
Yeah.
But I think for me, a lot of times if I'm firing up a pit and I've got it going, I'm probably going to wrap a vegetable in foil, or just to try to keep the smoke, because I want the plate to be balanced later on. Like if I got a smoky, like a tri-tip or a ribeye or a brisket or something like that, I probably want something really clean and super acidic to kind of cut the fat and the salt, that protein. So maybe I might think about things a little bit, more in that direction.
Now, I know a lot of people may not know this. It's not just barbecue that you do. You got your place in Austin. You do a lot of different things. How much of that do you use? Your stuff. Smoking it, cooking it, grilling it, versus the kitchen.
So for Uptown Sports Club, the newer place, it's about a year. We use a lot of Franklin stuff over there. There's brisket in the gumbo. We use tallow in the roux. Like there's a whole bunch of other kind of like cross stuff going on.
Yeah.
It's also a grill. So we do like a steak frite. We do a grilled redfish on the half shell and some stuff like that. So yeah, I think there's a little bit of cross stuff, but we don't have a smoker over there. It's more of a grill kind of brasserie kind of vibe. But there's a lot of crossover between the two restaurants.
Let me ask you this. I mentioned, some of the shows that I've seen you on, and you're judge and you're helping. I do. I watch them. If I'm at home not working, I'm watching fishing shows or barbecue shows. That's pretty much my life. That's how sad or awesome my life is. Depending
that sounds awesome.
Exactly. Depending on your
going on the awesome.
Yeah, go with the awesome. And these competitions, and I've been like a helper on a couple of teams here and there. I don't know. I don't know if I would have fun. I don't know if I would have fun I mean, are they fun for you? Do you still? I mean, I know you do them and you appreciate what they are, and it's great to win, but I don't know if that's fun for me.
I don't think it's not much fun for me. And, we have to keep in mind that I pretty much, live and breathe barbecue, so it's gotten out of the hobby zone, and it's definitely more like I got to go to work. It's time to make the donuts kind of thing. Yeah. But I really like the competition stuff. Not cooking it, that's fun, but I can do that anywhere. I can do it any day of the week at the restaurant. But it's really more about the people, I think.
The camaraderie.
And that's kind of with anything. It's really fun to see old friends make new friends. That's the cool thing about even hanging out, at the grill shop. You always just bump into people. And it's like, oh, hey, a long time no see. What's going on?
Yeah.
So I think I kind of like that aspect of it, but really, a lot of that stuff's not quite my style anyway. A lot of it's kind of too sweet. And, if I'm going to lose a night's worth of sleep, I don't know if that's how
I got better things to do to lose a night.
It might be more fun to smoke some vegetables at home.
Yeah, exactly. You mentioned sweet, and I wanted to ask you about that too. Carolina, Kansas City. I'm not going to get into the argument and make you pick one. I'm going to ask you though, whatever. I think, I think New York has really good barbecue, and people may turn their nose up.
I think there's great barbecue almost anywhere in the world. I mean, you can go literally anywhere and get a fabulous plate of barbecue. Yeah.
So what I was going to ask you about those styles, I mentioned a little while ago about we're brisket, ribs, chicken by and large, us backyard people. But boy, some of the things they're doing with their sauces, some of the things they're doing with the pork, some of the things they're doing. One of my go-tos is a smoked meatloaf, and I don't know where I learned that, pick that up, but like the cross pollination of barbecue, that's got to kind of warm your heart, because that's things that we're starting to get flavors from other places that really can translate, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great, and I celebrate all the different styles. I definitely don't ding any of them. Maybe there are a few things that I like better than other things, aka whole hog in the Carolinas. But it's like back when I started cooking barbecue, and I guess a lot of people did. barbecue was so regional. It was really the proteins, like, do they have pigs? Do they have cows?
Yeah.
What kind of wood? What style of cooker? What kind of flavors? And it was so regional, but that was also before the internet really existed. So now, with like YouTube stuff, I mean, they let anybody on YouTube, clearly.
You're looking at one.
But, like the internet and stuff like that, really people can be influenced in so many ways. And I think it is cool. And it is very much part of the evolution of barbecue. Now you're getting different cultures that are kind of coming in. You've got such like Tex-Mex barbecue, which has been a thing forever. Like different Asian cuisines kind of coming in. And I think it's so super cool. But thanks, internet.
Yeah, I've kind of been on a Korean barbecue kick lately, and that stuff is outstanding. All right, a couple of like actual behind the pit stuff with you before we talk about Franklin Days, which I will be there. It sounds like it's going to be a fantastic. So the people always talk about wrapping, and we talked about wrapping a little bit here. Is there a thumbnail sketch, so to speak, of what to wrap and what not to wrap? Because I may be a little weird. I do wrap my beef ribs. I do wrap brisket. I very rarely wrap ribs. I mean, from your perspective, all your experience, I mean, is it just a feel thing, or what would you tell people?
Well, I'm more of a rock and roll guy. Rap's not really my thing. Sorry, my dad jokes are gone too far.
Yeah. Like I said, you might be a little older than I thought you were.
103. So yeah, I mean, I think wrapping, it really depends on how you want it to be at the end. I mean, if you're cooking something that's kind of dry, maybe doesn't have a lot of fat, maybe it's too low and too slow. Wrapping in foil is probably a good one. I prefer to wrap pork in foil because pork kind of doesn't have a lot going on by itself.
It needs to get more tender.
Yeah, and like whatever moisture and fat then it happens to have, I definitely want to keep that, in the bag. So I do pork ribs in foil, do pork butts in foil for sure, wrap turkeys in foil with a lot of butter. But for brisket and like, other stuff, butcher paper's fine. And, I think if you've got like a really nice quality piece of meat, but that when you do decide to wrap something, I think for me, I like to push things as far as possible and get that bark on a brisket a little crunchier than I really want it to be when it's going to be done. Or, I want the color on a rack of ribs to be about 2 or 3 shades darker than I want them to be when they're finished, because all that stuff's going to change in the bag. It's going to soften the bark. It's going to steam out the color. Because if you think about the kind of color that you want, it's water soluble from a clean fire. So naturally it's going to steam back out because it's not oil soluble. So stuff like that. So I think, I'm one of my things is always able to kind of reverse engineer what I think I want, which has kind of got me into this whole barbecue thing anyway. I can kind of back in my head, but like for beef ribs, for example, I don't like to wrap those because I like them to be so crunchy and barky. But kind of my trick for beef ribs is instead of wrapping, I usually take tallow or butter or some kind of fat, usually tallow at Franklin, because we have a lot of tallow they were trying to get rid of. But get the bark like really crunchy, and then I let the tallow kind of soften it back up so there's a different chew to it. And the reason behind that is because it's usually on a tray right next to brisket, so I want it to be different.
Right.
But
what about? Go ahead.
But for wrapping a brisket, I mean, I think that, because that's I guess what most people do. You would be looking, or at least at Franklin Barbecue, we're always at the tail end of the stall. But that's also when we have 5 cookers that we're kind of slowing down, speeding up, and trying to time everything out. So
does every brisket stall at some point?
Yeah, for sure. I think if you know it's coming, and it doesn't have to necessarily. I mean, it's going to stall a little bit.
You can kind of expedite it a little bit, right?
You can rip right through it if you want. It all depends on how you want to render the seam fat, because that's when that happens.
Correct. A couple more things here. Spritzing, any particular meats you do there. I am light on that myself, and I don't know if I'm making a mistake. It's very rare that I'll spritz something.
I spritz pretty much everything, but it's not for flavor. It's for damage control.
Okay.
If you've got a thin flat on a cooker with a lot of airflow, and that flat's got to hold up to 9 hours before you wrap it, Well, you don't want to dry out the edges, so you just spritz it to keep the edges moist from drying out while you're letting the geographical center kind of catch up a little bit. So it's more damage controller, like the butts of the points, where it's getting the most amount of air. Just hit the points. And I'm real specific. I don't like a spray because it evaporates too quick. So I want like a stream that feathers out to about
really? I'm gonna have to do that.
You can kind of point and you're like, oh, that's getting dry. Squirt, squirt.
Oh wow.
So it's more damage control.
Yeah,
that's we use apple cider vinegar for everything, but that's really just because I started using it on pork butts a real long time ago. I don't think I can taste any acidity in there, maybe a little bit. Yeah. But it's hard to taste that over that kind of smoke. Yeah. But I'm also just kind of lazy, and why would we have a whole bunch of spray rigs when you can just have 5? Yeah.
I like the way you're thinking. Okay, so salt and pepper versus the rubs. And look, I go into Texas Star Grill and I'm looking at everything, for as far as rubs, but it can be as simple as salt and pepper. Do you have like like sort of a gauge on when you do salt and pepper? Keep it simple. And I'm thinking beef for me, but what else might you say about all these rubs? Because I do like a sweet and tangy, and that's what I use when I use rubs.
Yeah, well, I think so. I definitely come from a different place on that. Like, I don't really get to cook a small barbecue cook for personal enjoyment. It's like 72 racks of ribs for lunch.
Is that all?
And they have to taste exactly the same as they have every single day for the last 15 years. So we don't really get to fiddle around with much. But I think, if I'm getting into something, salt and pepper is always kind of my go-to. And then you can kind of add some stuff. But really for me, I think about how much flavor is going to go on this piece of meat or vegetable or whatever. How many hours it's going to be on there. And, I think some people, for like a brisket, like, oh, I got like a little bit of this, a little dash of this, a pinch of this, some Worcestershire powder. It's like, you're not going to taste that stuff over 12 hours.
What are we doing? Yeah, what are we doing?
Layer on layer on layer. It's just more complicated. So I think for the art of simplicity, salt and pepper for a base, and then just kind of add some stuff. And if you do add some stuff, I would maybe keep it like just something, I don't know, whatever you want, really. Something super simple. Like I'll put a little bit of paprika on pork to help the color a little bit. I'll do less pepper on pork ribs than I would brisket, because the pepper on a brisket is also there for texture, not so much for flavor.
Right.
And we also age our pepper for a couple weeks, so it's not as strong anyway, so we get more of the texture. So yeah, I mean, I think, again, the reverse engineering of it, if you're thinking about what you want it to taste like, and if you're really at a stage and as a cook where you're really refining this one piece of meat over and over and over, and you want it to get better and better. So that's when you start to kind of tweak things, and you start to like micro adjust things. But if you're just trying to get a feel for the fire, and you really want to taste the fire and how clean you can make it, or a certain type of wood, just go with salt, because you're not going to know, you're not going to get an accurate read if you start piling on too much stuff.
Don't overthink it, man. You're going to make me start aging my pepper based on this one podcast.
Hey, I just kind of like it aged.
That's going to be a tough conversation with my wife. Like, let's put all the pepper in here for a couple of weeks, or whatever it is, and we'll go from there. You mentioned the wood there. Is there a wheelhouse for you in terms of aged wood, or does it go depending on oak, or cherry or apple or whatever?
I mean, I'm pretty lucky to live in Central Texas because post oak is my all-time favorite cooking wood. I really, it's my favorite. So that worked out really good. But for Franklin, we kind of just use like the dregs from the year before. So we don't cut down healthy trees for firewood. Feel really bad about that. So we have terrible droughts, of course, every summer. So usually that's kind of when a lot of post oaks kind of fall. They sit out there and we dry them out, and we use them throughout the year. So sometimes we get junky wood, sometimes we get fresher stuff. And when you can burn a firebox at 680 plus degrees, it kind of doesn't matter so much.
Yeah, that's true too. But you're about a year is where you age most of your wood, you think?
Yeah, maybe a year and a half, if it was a healthy tree. But if it was a tree that had water damage, or maybe it had some spalting, or maybe it had, some critters are laid out in the field, or it just depends on the health of the tree when it was alive.
Yeah.
Because that's a big difference.
How are you? Where are you on mesquite? I happen to like mesquite, but a little goes a long way, man.
I also like mesquite. I had a conversation last night with someone about mesquite, actually. Oh, ironic.
How about that?
What are the odds? I like mesquite, but I do think people kind of tend to overuse a little bit. It is really dense wood, and it's got a lot of tannic acid in there. Yeah. So, I mean, if you think about like somebody like, say, Tom Perini up in Buffalo Gap, he uses mesquite and smokes with it, but that stuff is so dry you can hardly tell it's mesquite. It just gets a little bit of that flavor. Yeah. But if it's pretty green, it's going to smolder. It's going to be more oily and kind of sooty and kind of gross. So it's got a much wider scale, I guess. But I do like mesquite, though.
Yeah. I won't keep you, but I definitely want to talk about Franklin Days at Texas Star Grill Shop, and that is Saturday. That would be 15th, I believe. Hope I got that date right. Pretty cool thing. I know these types of places, and look, Rick and Corey and everybody over there at Texas Star Grill have a fantastic business, and it's not.
Oh, those guys are awesome.
It's awesome. It's awesome. But some of the things that they're going to have out there, I know you wanted to come. That's not going to be a part of the plan, but
it's not in the cards for Saturday.
It's not in the cards for Saturday. But what are some of the things that you want to really emphasize for listeners who obviously know you, as we've just been talking about for half an hour, some of the great things that you do, the science behind it, the techniques you have, what are some of the things that are available and some of the things you want them to know about coming out on Saturday?
I think, if anybody's been interested in a Franklin pit, I will say every time my fire went up, I say to myself, I think this is the best cooker I've ever cooked on.
Dude, you don't have to tell me about it. I spent an hour looking at it.
Oh my God, they're so consistent. They're so beautifully built. They're heavy. They'll last forever. You can hand it down to your kids if you want. It should last you like 100 years. Not warranted though.
Don't come back in 99 years. Yeah, don't come back. Hey, man.
But I think, for anybody that's been interested in a Franklin pit, they're pretty expensive. Steel's really expensive. Labor's really expensive, all that stuff. So I think it's a good way to kind of get your foot in the door. I think if anyone's been curious about a Franklin pit, it's a really cool time to just go kind of kick the tires a little bit and talk to other people, like the grill shop guys and a ton of people that will be out there that have cooked on them. And I don't know. I just think it's going to be a really cool scene to go. Just
I totally agree. I like the fact that you didn't paint it. I like the rugged look on it.
Well, I do too. They're kind of our little rat rods. That's why they look like that. I want to be able to see the welds. I want to be able to have it patina and age. It's kind of like grandma's cast iron skillet. You got to take care of it. You got to keep it oiled and stuff. But I look at cookers that I've been cooking on forever, and the doors have soot and they're dark and they're kind of maybe a little bit of rust over here. But I kind of think of them as like battle scars. Like there's all these little scars when you see like a little bit of rib sauce that's dripped down in this one spot. Like, I really got to stop doing that.
I remember that cook. I remember that. I remember that cook.
But I think they're really cool. But I don't know. I would just encourage anybody that's in the neighborhood to go on out there, check them out. There are definitely some good deals to be had.
Yeah, there are.
I think they're really. I looked at all those pits just a couple weeks ago, and as I was getting them off the truck, and there's some good stuff in there.
No, there is. I said that was going to be the last thing, but I had one more that's just been
keep them coming.
Kind of burning in my head here. I was talking about things yesterday. I was talking to somebody over the weekend about pellet grills. And I have both. I got the pellet grill. I got the offset grill. I've got the PK, as I mentioned. Here's the thing about pellet grills. All of us who have been doing it with our dads, in my case, since I was 4 years old at Brackenridge Park in San Antonio, we're conditioned with the wood and getting it right. And I like the process, and I like just sort of figuring it out and spending time out there. But one thing I like about my pellet grill, it's introducing a lot more people into the game, so to speak, because they didn't have a clue. They didn't like to spend all that time. They didn't like fiddling with the fire and letting wood age for a year and all that other stuff. So I think there's a real place for it in terms of at least introducing people. And I was just curious about someone like yourself. who is clearly a purist, and I consider myself a purist, but I ain't gonna lie, I use my pellet grill a lot too.
Well, I got to be honest. I've actually never cooked on a pellet grill.
Okay.
That being said, of course, I love the magic of being by fire, and
Yes.
that's just the coolest thing ever. But it is pretty neat to be able to get a good night's sleep at the same time. And it used to not really matter that much to me. I was like, no, I'm going to stay up for days on end and make food. Yeah, that's not really a great way to live. So I think, I think pellet cookers have come a really, really long way. If you think about maybe, I don't know, I guess they really started coming around maybe 10-ish or so years ago. But they had a really distinct smell. Like they didn't smell good. And if it doesn't smell good, it's probably not going to taste very good either.
Exactly.
But I remember there was a really, like you could get out of the truck and be like, I smell a pellet cooker somewhere. Where is it?
Yeah.
But now technology's come a long way. The pellets are better. You can get higher quality, stuff without weird fillers or any of that kind of stuff. Yeah. They burn hotter. They burn cleaner. I think maybe I wouldn't be able to tell as much as I used to. Yeah. But what you lose is the ability to control the airflow. You can't speed it up and slow it down. You can't get this fat to render at this temperature while protecting this. Like you lose the control. Yes. And brisket will never be like that 110% that we all really want it to be. But with a pellet cooker, it's going to be pretty gosh darn close. And the difference is probably worth a night's sleep.
Yeah. By the way, I actually thought you were going to walk away.
I think it's really cool.
It's an introduction. To me, I tell people it's like teaching a kid how to fish. Maybe for the rest of their lives, they're going to just really get into fishing, and then they're going to get to the higher level. But like I said, by the way, I really thought you were going to walk away when I brought up pellet grill.
Well,
oh crap! I ticked off Aaron Franklin.
No, I think they're great. I think my view has softened a bit over the years. Because I have been doing this stuff for a while. I don't know that I would ever buy one and put on my back porch because eating barbecue at home's probably not really something I'm that interested in. Because I could just go to work and grab it anytime I want. But I think they're cool. And I like you said, I do agree that it's pretty neat that it's introduced so many new people to the art, the sport, if you will. No ding on those things either.
It is an art, and you are one of the pioneers in so many things, and we really appreciate you joining us, man. It's something we're going to do every week, so we're going to have people like yourself. Maybe somewhere down the line, we'll hit you up again, man.
Yeah, give me a holler. Good talking to you.
Will do. All right, that's Aaron Franklin coming up next with Gus Johnston, the smoking hot tip of the week. Hold on a second.